A petition for Deli Carpini on behalf of Colbia Enterprises LLC to operate a gas station convenience store shell station at 342 Boston Post Road East on a 24-hour basis pursuant to Chapter 342 of the Code of the City of Marlborough. I believe, Attorney Hall, you are here. You want to come and sit in the well this evening? Do you have someone with you that would like to join, or?
I do. I've got our Vice President of Operations, Angelo Rue, is here with us. And if there's any additional questions, we can have Mr. Rue come on up and answer those.
Okay. So, as I stated, you are looking to operate this gas station for 24 hours. I think everybody in their packets received the minutes from the public hearing. It was held on June 5th. And I don't know if you have anything you would like to add.
I actually don't. Hopefully everybody was here back on the 5th. I think the application's relatively self-explanatory and straightforward. As we had discussed back on the 5th, the standard is whether or not the proposal tends to provide a convenience and a welfare for the community without essentially a degradation of the community. And as we went through on the 5th, I think this proposal does. We've seen over time increased number of what we call visits, or increased number of customers coming into the store, anywhere from on a slow night 70 up to almost 100. Now, as of the past, probably in the past year, when we've looked at those numbers. I think that alone is probably enough evidence to show that there's a convenience that's being utilized and necessary for the surrounding community. And in terms of a welfare, I do think that these locations are seasons locations, which are well lit, safe, also littered with cameras, I guess you'd say, tend to be very safe locations, tend to have very little issues with any sort of loitering or illegal activity. I know for years prior to us operating the location, there were some issues there. As I also mentioned when I was here on the 5th, I've spoken directly with the police chief. There's been not a single issue, no calls to this location, and in fact the police chief had no objection, which was important to us. I mean, that was something I wanted to know before I came before the town council and coming before the Urban Affairs Committee. In terms of additions to the application, there wouldn't be any. I think the application does speak for itself. I do think it's a convenience and a welfare for the community without causing any degradation to the community. I think it's something that's clearly being utilized by people that generally work on a third shift or work a swing shift. It's one of the stores in our chain that we see the most activity for. I think because its location, because of its proximity, because I think there's a lot of employment in the area, and there's employment in the area which is not just first shift employment. Certainly I'm happy to answer any questions. As I mentioned, our Vice President of Operations is here as well. If there's any questions remaining, we're happy to address those.
All right, so just for everybody's benefit, and if anybody's paying attention at home, our code does state that gas stations open no earlier than 6 a.m. and close no later than 11 p.m. daily. We do have the ability to have exceptions to that. We did recently give a permit to another gas station that wanted 24 hours on Lincoln Street. We gave them the hours of 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. So I don't know if councilors have questions, comments, anybody. Councilor Doucette.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just as I observe the situation, excuse me, there's about 3 gas stations within a mile from where you are, if you're heading east, right?
Yeah.
So plus there's, well, 2. Plus there's one further up, I think it's the Gulf Station, and then the one on Lincoln, which we talked about being 5 to 11. So, my concern is if we let you open 24 hours, then we're going to get the other ones to open 24 hours, and We don't want this to be 24 hours everywhere type. So we're trying to treat them all equally, okay? I think, you know, the one at Lincoln has asked before to open 24 hours. I'm willing to support a 5 a.m. to 11, similar to what happened with Lincoln Street, to see how that works out. And that way, at least it provides a degree of consistency for other gas stations around. So I really, at this point, I don't see a 24-hour need for here, because I see that just being a cascade, you know, so, and I don't want to see that.
Yeah,
okay?
and that's understandable.
Yeah, but I could definitely support a 5 to 11.
If I could address that just momentarily, the idea of a cascade is why you're here, to take each one of these on a case-by-case basis. I think our record does speak for itself. Our operation speaks for itself. In communities in which we do operate for 24 hours, it's very successful. It does offer an additional convenience to the community. The cascade really is an issue that's up to you know, the board. If there's an application that the board feels is a boon to the community, a convenience to the community, then obviously it should be granted. If the board sees an operation that comes before it has a record of being a degradation to the community, then I think the board has, or the council ultimately has the ability and the responsibility to reject that application. But the idea that there'd be similarly situated operators in front of you that would be entitled to what I think we are offering, I don't think is necessarily going to end in a cascade. I think everybody's got to come and have a record, have an operation that the town is going to be comfortable with, and be able to present something that's going to be a benefit to the town. Not just, because if it's just one then all, then there's really no reason for the exception or the hearing.
So the Shell station that you have is very similar to the mobile station that's across the street from Descenza, okay? Where there's you know, food, assortment of new foods. I mean, sure. You know, gas stations have become takeout for food as well as fuel. Yes. You know, and you know, significantly upgrading quality of food, by the way. So that's all good. But I can see, like, if we gave you a 24-hour operation, I would expect the mobile here within a year. Okay, sorry, sorry. Right. You know, the other thing is, another case specifically, while right now I don't want to see this happening, is because of the construction on Route 20 being the mess as it is right now, the construction that's going to go across the street from you when they develop new apartment complexes after that construction's done, I'd rather see all that dust settled before we visit a 24-hour on this. Just because chaos is going around you in this location, let's settle down, yep. Okay, before we do that. So, but I think I've said enough. Thank you.
And I can address that. From a traffic standpoint, we don't, or gas stations in general, don't drive traffic. They're drive-by locations. They're not, I wish it were a destination. I wish somebody would get in their car and say, you know, I want to go to Seasons. But generally, about 90% of our customers are just drive-by. The traffic, we tend not to impact the traffic anywhere. Certainly, there's ins and outs, you know, ingress and exits that have to be addressed as traffic. But the traffic numbers, the drive-bys, generally don't change.
If you're open in hours outside of other gas stations in the area, traffic will go to you. The technology is there to do that.
Yeah, and we've seen that. We have seen that. When we were open for 24 hours, we were seeing anywhere from, you know, average, say an average of 80 visits over the course of an evening, which is certainly not the highest in our chain, but it shows that people are seeking it out, seeking the convenience out, or at least there's a lot of swing shift or third shift workers in the area. That tends to be the driver.
Councilor Wagner, you had your
Thank you,
hand up.
Madam Chair. I just wanted to concur. I have heard from my constituents that live near this location, that about this property, and there is concerns. So, I mean, until right now, I just feel like we've put so much on the people that live directly around until the Route 20 project is finished and the construction project is also complete. Then I'd be willing to revisit it. But as of right now, I think it's a lot to ask, and hearing negative comments from the people who live right there, I really want to honor that and don't think this is the right time for this hourly extension.
What were the comments, just out of curiosity? Because I haven't heard any, and I would want to, well, Angela probably would want to know more than me.
I'm just more concerned, just the noise, just the aggravation that comes with a business operating those hours. There's some restaurants in the area that there's just been ongoing complaints for years and how they impact the neighbors that they abut. They've already have to put up with so much just getting in and out of their facility, particularly the people who live at the villages with all the construction going on, and this feels just like another thing that's landing in their lap. And I hear what you're saying, and maybe a year or two, it doesn't feel like it's gonna make or break your business. It would be good to find a balance between let's honor the people who are living there now and hold off on this for now, that I'm not seeing a pressing need for this to be 24 hours. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it's, you know, I think it's an argument if you write off 495, you get sometimes people, you know, you're driving down the highway and, oh no, I need gas right now.
True.
You can see that argument there, but on Route 20 and swing shifts and, you know, it might be a convenience to some people, but for the trying to weigh the impact on it, for me right now, it doesn't feel like something I can support given the complaints that I've heard from my constituents.
All right, Councilor Brown, I saw your hand, but I'm going to go to Councilor Navin first and see if committee members have questions. So, Councilor Navin.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the comments that have made up to this point. You know, and just to address the concern about the cascading that Councilor Doucette brought up, you know, I think it's a good point. You make a fair rebuttal when you say that it's our decision to make, and I think it is. But we are fortunate to have quite a few gas station companies that are good actors and have a good record. And if the only decision was, you know, based on that, you know, then it would be, you know, how are we being fair to one business over the other, you know, and just to say, well, they got here first and we don't want too many of them. You know, I have an issue with, you know, the mobile station on the other end of town. We've just gotten a few more gas stations that have opened up. It's not that we haven't had bad actors in the community in the gas station business, but we are lucky to have that. And so I do think that I would also be supportive of opening up to match the permit that we just did on Lincoln Street for a 5 to 11. But at this point, I would not be supporting anything greater than that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Councilor Landers.
I would like to support it, but right now, I don't really see the need. You know, we talk about let's talk about the non-gas part, the food part. If we didn't have store 32 in CBS, both 24 hours, you can get all your needs there that you need. You know, at the market, they have they have everything, supermarket. In CBS, they're all purpose, they have everything, you know. So if we didn't have those two, I would probably say, well, the gas isn't a bad idea, but also, you know, the fact that your market would carry the milk, the bread, and that type of stuff. But right now, you know, I'm trying to support it, but I don't see the need right now. I'll be honest with you.
And again, I would note it's not necessarily need-based application process. The standard is whether or not it provides a convenience and contributes to welfare. So a need would be, I think that would be a much higher hurdle for sure. But again, it's convenience and welfare, not necessarily whether there's a need in the community. Again, you can get some of those things at CVS or other like retailers. It's just whether or not there's that through the night combination where you can get gas, you can get air in your tires, you can get, you know, convenience items and food, and whether or not there's the ability to provide that to the community, which it seems as if this particular store, the community has utilized it quite a bit.
I will just throw out there, the language is the council may, it's not the council
Correct.
shall. So we don't have to do anything, and it is up to this body. Councilor Brown, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to share that I am someone who has worked odd shifts, and for me, it's never been something that I considered to have a 24-hour gas station in more of a area like that. I'd always plan ahead and know, you know, what my situation was, and I knew the location of the 24-hour stations. But from a council standpoint, I would just be curious if there are any other councilors who have had constituents reach out to them saying that they would like the service, because I've never had anybody approach me and say, you know, I have problems getting to a gas station or to get air in my tires at off hours. So if that's something anybody else has experienced, I just haven't. Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Any motion? Councilor Doucette.
Motion to modify the order to do 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. versus 24 hours?
All right, I don't know if anybody has a copy or looked up the copy that the language that we used for the 431 Lincoln Street, and I apologize, but I will just read it quickly. So it would really be in order that the application from this location issue a permit to grant an exception to the hours of operation under the code. Service station located may be open for business from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily. Service station is not permitted to be open for business outside the hours. The permit's effective for 1 year from the date of approval, and then it can be renewed for periods up to 5 years. It is non-transferable. The petitioner shall install, maintain, and use a video surveillance and video recording system to monitor entryways and sales attending positions. Is that something your store already has?
The video surveillance?
Does?
Yes, we have actually about 30 cameras at that location.
Okay. Petitioner shall install and maintain a silent robbery panic alarm system monitored by a central alarm system.
We have an alarm system.
And the petitioner shall permit the chief of police or the chief's designee to inspect upon demand the video surveillance, video monitoring, and alarm systems. Petitioner must limit the hours of operation of the station to between, oh, I guess that really doesn't impact you. That was specific to that one. So the final one was petitioner shall not permit or suffer any automotive repair work to be performed on the premises by any person. So is all that language that would be written specifically for this location all okay with you? Would you?
Other than the hours, obviously, everything else we can comply
All right.
with.
So
Sure.
as everybody has said, I think the construction of 20 is a concern for all of us, the real need. In a year, we can assess and see where everybody is. So you're okay with your motion with
As amended.
those conditions?
Yes.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to do an exemption for 5 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Madam Chair?
Councilor
Instead of
Doucette.
1 year, can we make it for 3 years?
I'm sorry?
You said come back in a year?
It may be renewed for periods of up to 5 years, so
Right,
it's
so
good
renew
for
it-
1 year.
Yeah, do either 2 or 3 years. What?
I'm sorry? 1 year. That's
Madam Chair?
what this particular one says.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, so the ordinance says it's good for 1 year, then you can renew it up to 5. I mean, we don't think we get the luxury to change that part, but, yeah.
Okay, we cannot. That's fine.
All right, so it's moved and seconded. Is there further discussion on the order? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this can get sent to the solicitor. I can ask him to create the document. I can have it on our July meeting. I could ask for a suspension to have it approved. So otherwise, you'd have to wait till the August meeting because we only meet once in July and once in August.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
that,
I think July's
unless
20,
there's.
the 24th?
it's the 24th.
That's great. Yeah.
All right?
All right.
Is there anything else on this one then? Okay, so we'll give you a couple minutes to finish up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch. All right, so the second item on the agenda is order number 23-108-721F, a proposed ordinance amendments to Chapter 650 zoning relative to certain provisions concerning mixed use and affordable housing. This was tabled in committee from our last meeting in June. Everybody has been sent lots of material. I apologize for having the last-minute information sent. I think you should all have the document that is, how many pages? 5 pages, I think. 6 pages with lots of red lines. And then you have my 2-page that was sent, I think, yesterday. And then everybody should have Councilor Ossing's comments that he has with questions. So I don't think he included anything from the Sunday in the questions, so some of it may be a little bit different, but unless there's an objection, I'm just going to start from the beginning and go through and try to cover the changes that I have and questions from Councilor Ossing and questions from anybody else that come up. So, again, we are amending lots of different sections in this. I know it's like I started this and you go down the rabbit hole, because once you do one thing, then something else comes up and something else comes up. So we have the area median income, AMI, which is new language. We went over this at our first meeting. Councilor Ossing's question is, how does one find the document so everyone uses the same information? You go to huduser.gov, and you will find both the Massachusetts numbers, which are actually, it's $127,700. But it also, then you can choose your own state, and you can choose your own city, and you wind up with a document that shows the income limits. These were just updated for 2023, I think in May. So these get updated every year. I think my point that I made at the last meeting was, rather than having something that does change on a yearly basis, we have a document that everybody in the industry knows what it is. It may be new to us, but this is what everybody uses to find out the income limits for individual areas. So we're part of the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, HUD, Metro, FMR area. I don't know that that will stay that way forever. I would hope that it doesn't change. But if it does, it's still, I think HUD will exist forever. So I hope that answers your question and that you're okay with just having this definition.
If I can, Madam, again, I was just trying to play, let me go find it, and I couldn't find it. So I just want to make sure, and maybe that'll get flushed out in the legal, when the solicitor puts it in proper format, that everyone goes to the same spot to get the same exact information. That's what my concern was, and I was just playing the, I'm real good at the idiot test to try it, and I'm not sure I came up with the right spot, but.
Well, I actually did the same thing probably that you did. I just put into the search engine area median income, and it took me right to HUD as the possibility to click on. We could, if he suggests, and it's okay by me, add in that specificity that it's a document created by the Housing and Urban Development, the federal government.
I don't have, I'm sure I'm sure the solicitor will have the right way to word it. I mean, that's.
Do you want to come up into the well so you, I hope you have all the documents also.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.
Are you amenable to having an additional sentence that the AMI can be found through HUD.gov or through the Housing Urban Development website of the federal government?
Yes, I think that would work out fine. I think the other thing I was going to suggest is we might add some language that says something like, we have here determined for Boston, Cambridge, Quincy. In case that did change, we might just say, or whatever statistical area is applicable to Marlborough. So we'll just have it because those can change over time, so I think we'll.
And I think it's on everybody's aware, I had added that other language, but then we don't have a community development department, we don't have affordable housing trust, so I guess if we added in whatever you're suggesting, I think everybody would be okay with it. All right. Then we have the eligible household, adding in that a household whose gross household income does not exceed the corresponding percentage of AMI specified in section 650-26. I believe Councilor Ossing's next question was on the mixed use. And once again, as I go down the rabbit hole, I make mistakes, and I believe this is not what I wanted to be in there. I was just sort of looking at anything that said Marlborough Village on it. Or actually, this is not. So mixed use is actually in the table of 650-5, which is the definitions, and I think that everybody got a printout of that. So I know, let's see, Councilor Ossing's comment was on the what is a housing to business ratio. And I get that, and I think that gets down to the addition of the number 3. I thought everybody was okay with the other stuff until I added that. And I added it at the suggestion of a couple of people in the thinking that we don't really have a way to, I didn't want to put a percentage of the non-residential has to be a certain portion of a project because I thought it became a little too complicated. I did, after talking with Councilor Navin, come up with a sentence that would be before that one, that would say, a mixed-use project shall have at least, and I threw out 20% of its ground floor as non-residential. And then it would say, during the site plan special permit process, the city council will consider the ratio of housing to business to ensure it fits. It's like, I left it vague because I think a huge project, we might want more commercial than a smaller project that might have the space to have more commercial. So I'm not sure if a number is the way to go, but I'm open for discussion. And Councilor Navin, since we talked about this, I'm going to throw it at you for a moment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think part of my concern is, wanting to make sure that we get not only, a good commercial space in a potential project, but that it is sized appropriately, and so that, we have the better chance to get a restaurant or another, selfishly another brewery or another, wine bar or, something that will continue to drive people downtown, and not wanting someone to come in and then recognize that their, the economics of their project have changed and said, well, if we shrink the portion of commercial, then we can get 2 extra apartments, somewhere on the ground floor. And so trying to create language that would protect us a little bit, but also kind of incentivize would be the goal. And I agree with the chair. It's challenging to figure out what that language is, because this is being done not to restrict projects, but to help us get the best projects that we're hoping for. And so whether that language is something like the chair suggested, or I didn't know if we put in a percentage as well as a square footage and say, one of the other, or, perhaps even we put in a percentage, but then give the council the ability to amend it, written into the ordinance, and perhaps that would be a way to go. That basically, starts us off on a sound footing where we can say, this is in the ordinance. So if we do get to a point with a project that says, well, we don't have to do that, because, or we end up in some sort of legal action, we can say, well, actually, it is at least at the baseline here within the ordinance. So I would be interested in your thoughts on that, Mr. Solicitor, but also, be interested to hear what other people think.
And Solicitor, I think we talked about this when you and I met with Mike, with Councilor Ossing, and we sort of didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, if I remember correctly, but
So I was gonna say, I think there's a few different approaches to defining mixed use, and some of those we had talked about, which were, do you do a percentage ratio of residential and non-residential? Other places do it on a square foot basis. Other places do it by the floor. Those are just a couple of examples. So, you know, this amended definition right now, the draft, to my mind, in number 2, it's trying to get at non-residential on the first floor. And then the question is, I guess, if that's what the council is looking to do, then what is the intent of number 3? Maybe is it beyond the first floor, or is it meant to modify number 2? That's one question I was going to throw out there. But the other is, if we're going to allow for some flexibility to consider the ratio of the use, there's a couple of things we have to keep in mind. If it's a by right site plan type of use, which, you know, mixed use is in one district right now, I know that might change, then I think we have to be very precise about how we define that ratio. If it's going to be a special permit, the issue is similar in that I would recommend the council needs criteria to be able to determine when we would have an adjustable ratio, what that would mean. That allows, you know, everyone involved, the council, the development community, to understand, the abutters understand what can be built on a particular site.
And I think my hope is that we get rid of site plan and everything special permit, but that's just me. And I guess I would then, if we have the at least something, that is the threshold you can't go below, but then depending again on the site and where it is, we could, and I guess you don't know what that's going to be to put something in. So somebody had their hand up, that Councilor Ossing?
I'll wait.
Councilor Wagner? Or Councilor Doucette, who? Sorry.
So, question about what is considered residential use versus non-residential use. If there is, let's say, a gym or recreational area that's reserved for tenants of the facility, is that area still considered to be residential?
Through the chair, I think that's a great question. I think, one, it's going to involve the building commissioner interpreting the ordinance. I will say that there are other ordinances out there that are very specific on that point, about what residential uses will be allowed on the first floor. Some are they will allow for that because they view it as it's not sort of purely residential. Others do not want to see that on the first floor because they want it totally activated for commercial, street purposes. So,
Right.
so yeah, it's a good question, and the way this ordinance is written, it's not precise on that point, so it could be interpreted.
By who's in the seat?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So like if for sake of argument, a housing complex moves in downtown, they put a Planet Fitness in on the first floor, and the tenants have free access to the Planet Fitness, that's considered to be acceptable in this case.
I would imagine the building commissioner would agree that that would be it's a commercial use.
Commercial
it's a fitness.
use,
But
yeah.
if it's the difference that you mentioned earlier, right, if it was
I know, we're talking gray
right,
area
it'd be
here.
very,
That's why, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting, some communities address that very specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would adding public business use clarify that versus the private business use of a private gym or a private
It could, yeah.
whatever? All right, so
could.
we can,
Okay.
Councilor Ossing?
Right, so the purpose of, in my thought, deleting that item 3, I believe it's unnecessary because item 2 covers it. It says on the ground floor, facing streets, has to be commercial type facilities. So why do I need to, because now I'm going to say, well, we're going to have a ratio. All right, what's your definition of a ratio, Mr. Naven? Irish, Brown, Orem? We're all going to have a different one. I mean, what's good, what's bad? I mean, I don't know. So why do I want to interject that subjectivity into the ordinance, when the ordinance already says the ground floor is going to have commercial? It does it for me. So that's the purpose. I mean, I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Councilor Nabin.
I appreciate that point. I guess my argument would be, and it's a fair point, that we're all, you know, as we always say, if we all had to design the standards or we had to design anything else, we'd come up with 11 different options, which is fair. I think, you know, we heard rumors about it, I think originally when 57 Main Street was with the former owner, that, you know, in order to make it work, we're gonna have to shrink down the commercial side. It'll still be commercial, but it'll be an office space versus, you know, the opportunity for a new restaurant. I would think it would be helpful if we could, you know, make the space have a baseline where it would be something better than another cell phone store or another, you know, small convenience store or something else. You know, there are certain businesses that we already have quite a bit of. If we have a bigger square footage, it perhaps may not be worth it to have something other than a restaurant or something else that we may be looking to have more of downtown.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Ossian.
again, read number 2. To achieve a mix of residential to business uses, such as retail or restaurant, that is a balanced and compatible, ground floors of buildings fronting streets or public access ways shall be restricted to non-residential uses, except as specified below.
So this would be a question for me then. That means the entire ground floor, or does that mean?
That's how I read it, unless, as Councilor Roby has put in, it's back, behind, not street facing, which is that part below.
Part.
It's set behind. Again, it's difficult to read with the strikeouts and underlines. Mixed building that has business uses on the ground floor and residential on other floors, so long as the building set behind does not face a public way.
And I guess the thing that threw me for this one as being hard to figure out is specifically the, shame on me for a minute, the current row building, where yes, there is non-residential, but there's also parking. So the non-residential is tiny because they need the parking spaces. So can we put in a way to make it restricted to non-residential and not parking?
But then we're gonna get into the part, again, so when in 2014, we did months of public input to figure out what we wanted downtown, and we're now gonna just, you know, in a matter of one evening, kind of change all that. I'm not sure that that's the way, a little more thought that goes into it. I think the way you have it worded with ground floors facing, I mean, if you can't have any parking, I mean, where do we, again, the whole parking issue, council need to decide, what do you want downtown, all right? If the issue is you only want a 30-room building, say so. Makes it easy for the developer, all right? Makes it easy for us so we know what we're getting, all right? But you can't, you go back to 57 Main Street, it's allowed by what we have in the ordinance. So if we don't like 57 Main Street, change the ordinance to what you want. And I'm gonna guess there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I'm gonna assume 11 different opinions of what that is gonna look like. But if you can't eliminate parking and then say you want, I mean, we gotta give. Something's gotta give.
But if we put a percentage in there for that, number 3, that allows them to still park, but it ensures a baseline for what the non-residential is going to be. So I will go to Councilor Wagner.
I always support keeping it simple, and I agree with the keeping the first floor is commercial. I think if we start with percentages, that's going to get things, it's going to get really complicated and could end up with, well, a small percentage, and then you're going to have a tiny little cell phone store or something, and then you're gonna have parking. And so the whole idea, what's the goal of it? If we go back to the goal, we're good with residential above, we want commercial businesses to enliven the whole area. So that means you gotta have space for something other than a phone booth sized business. So first floor, just keep it simple, first floor, and then parking's a whole, we've got to revisit that. I mean, I think I still go back to this, a lot of this is fantasy, and until we address the parking issue by something like adding another parking garage, we're never going to really build anything viable. But this moves us, the goal of this is adding the affordability unit and trying to clarify some of the language. So in that sense, keep it simple, first floor commercial, above that residential, and then we have to figure out parking requirements.
So you would eliminate number 3?
I don't really think it's necessary. I think the simpler we keep this, the better.
Okay. Who else should I see? I'm going to go to committee members first. Councilor Doucette, did you have your hand up? This Councilor Landers.
Well, I would like to think that 11 of us or 10 of us, I think we all want mixed use downtown, and I think probably 90% of us, when we talk about mixed use, we're talking a restaurant and eating establishment. And that does create, you know, other problems as far as parking, because if you got a restaurant, medium-sized restaurant, you know, on Friday and Saturday night, they're gonna draw a pretty good crowd. What we'd probably do, and I was just kind of chuckling to myself, and I love valet parking. That's probably one of the things we'd have to introduce downtown is valet parking. Because we do have areas of downtown, you know, I'm thinking up by the Masonic Building and so forth, that, you know, the valets could bring your car up there, you know, and then at the end of your meal, they go get it and bring it back. But I think Councilor Wagner brought it up again. Parking, somehow we got to really, you know, get that out on the table. I really, and I think, I've said it a couple of times, that probably means that we got to change a lot of our parking regulations. You know, whether we introduce diagonal parking, during the winter months we have different types of parking. Parking is the key. I mean, how can we possibly think of putting a medium-sized restaurant? You know, some developer comes in with apartments, and by the way, it would always be a situation that commercial or restaurants would always be on the first floor. I can't think of a time that you would ever think of putting commercial or restaurants above the first floor, because that mixes in with the residents, and I don't think you want people going to the second and third floor looking for their restaurant when there's other housing there. But parking is the key, because, as I started to say, you get a pretty good restaurant crowd there, you know, unless you introduce the idea of valet parking, or as Councilor Walker mentioned, you know, another garage. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. If we're going, how quickly we're going to get that third garage. It would be nice.
Yeah, we're not going to get a garage, but we could probably work on some of the issues. So
that's it for now, Madam Chair.
All right, and Councilor Doucette?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as item 3 goes in the mixed-use areas, one of the things we need to still be aware of is basically the tenants still need to get into their apartments, so there has to be some entrance on the first floor that provides some access for the tenants to get to the units, you know. So it's not going to be 100% residential. We can word it so that, you know, that the vestibule, when they come in, has to be identified clearly, you know, and I just want to make sure that it's not parked in a corner somewhere just because of legalese. You know, it should be something that's apparent and open, you know.
And I don't think an entryway into the upstairs is an issue for a small portion that it would be in the building.
I just want to make sure, you know, so having some part of the ground floor being assigned to residential open space, but not apartment units, you know. I'm not sure how to word that, but you understand what I'm saying with that?
I just may help to clarify. I mean, it's pretty standard operation. It's a public door that you can enter to go to the restaurant, enter the building, and then the residents will have a key card or something to access either a stairwell or a elevator to go upstairs that the public wouldn't have access to, only residents can. So, again, I just always caution, we get too detailed with this, with the what-ifs, and it gets so complicated, no one can understand it. Right. I mean, to have a building where the residents can't enter, I don't think we need to put that in language, oh, and yeah, the residents have to actually be able to enter the building.
No, I just want to make sure that the wording...
Public access.
Right, I just want to make sure it doesn't exclude anything. It's, as long as the wording doesn't box ourselves in. I'm not trying to make the box tighter, I'm just making sure the wording doesn't box us in.
Okay, Councilor Orme, did I see a hand?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we've come a long way since 2014, haven't we? Eon Maine, we learned a lot from that. By the way, they were looking at a rooftop facility for that area, but they still, unfortunately, have not built. And I was going to say, yes, we have a lot to say here about what we want our city to look like, but I think in respect to number 3, we do keep it simple. Mixed use, commercial on the first floor, I think that's the best way. I agree with Councilor Wagner. The market will dictate what will go there. Might it be 20% of a retail, say, shoe shop, and then the rest a restaurant? We learn that right now down at 57 Main Street. You got businesses that are still asking for parking down there, and they can't get enough parking spaces, and then we're telling the market to come in and build a restaurant there, and they're going to have the same ordeal. You know, they're going to be looking at this saying, what am I to do? Maybe I'll call a business person nearby and have valet service. That's not a bad idea, Councilor Landers. But again, the market will dictate what comes into this city, but we do need to have clear guidance that's not complicated. So I think just keep it simple in this respect. Commercial on the first floor, and residential there up, and then we'll decide parking. Unfortunately, I debated on this floor many a times with the previous councilor, and he would always say, well, look at the parking garage right now. I said, yeah, but go down to that parking garage on a Thursday afternoon. You're lucky if you can find a spot. So, but that's gone. That was back when we debated this issue, but I'm still of the same concern that we have to resolve parking. No matter what we do here tonight, the Urban Affairs Committee does, but again, keep it simple. Councilor Wagner said perfectly, keep it simple, and again, we do need to work on the bigger portion, and I don't think 20,000 per space is going to do it, but that's for further down when we discuss this. Thank you.
All right, so I'm getting the sense that keeping it simple is the way to go, and we delete the number 3. Is that sort of the consensus of everybody? I mean, eventually the whole council has to vote on this. I don't want to put something out there that's not going to pass. I'm trying to be... all right, so the next one is 650-17, the table of use regulations. And this is where we get into the on page 2, the very last column, the mixed-use developments. I am suggesting changing from a Y to a special permit. I included the hotels, mostly because when you read the Marlborough Village District language, for hotels it says that they can park in the garage. So if we're removing that ability, or my attempt is to limit that, but the hotels can, then it becomes a whole nother nightmare. So make them a special permit so we can talk about the parking when we're there. I know Councilor Ossing's comment, I think, was to go back to yes, and we discuss it, but I will open it up. Councilor Doucette?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Specifically hotels, for a minute, I just want to say, we have great locations where hotels are being put up now. We have an abundance of hotel rooms that are rarely filled except for, you know, championship games at New England Sports Center, and they take it all the way from New Hampshire down to Rhode Island anyway, so it doesn't matter for that one. in the case of the Marlborough Village District, we're talking about a hotel downtown, and I'm not sure if that's not much of an appealing location for a hotel. I would put it no, and just say, no, you can't put a hotel downtown, because I don't think we're ever gonna get one, unless someone wants to take the Walker Building and convert it to an elite hotel, which may or may not happen, but I wouldn't say yes. I would definitely agree with the special permit, but I would say no overall. I can think of a lot of other uses for the Walker Building.
Okay, Councilor Navin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the special permit, changing these to special permit. I wasn't here in 2014, but I understand the fact was, that when the district was created, it was done so to incentivize people to come and build downtown, which, I think we've seen some mixed results on that. Since I've been here, I think that, we talk about, wanting to build these projects that are good for this community, that incentivize businesses to come here. I am one of the people who are still battered and bruised from the 57 Main Street discussion, as I know many of us are. When we go and, we come in here and we bring developers in and we talk to them, and we say, we'd like to see this or we'd like to see that, and we come to an agreement or we don't come to an agreement, and we end up in legal action, it makes me question what it is that we're actually spending hours doing here. And I think for me, giving us the ability to have something a little bit more concrete to require is something that would make me a little bit more comfortable, makes me believe that we would be able to get to projects that are a little bit better. I recognize that by showing developers that by right they can come in here and build something is helpful, and we may feel better to say, oh, well, we have site plan review, so we still have a say. It doesn't often feel that way, and so for me, requiring a special permit gives a little bit more of a say in this. And then I think also what we end up, as we continue this discussion on what we actually put into zoning so that we can point to it, so we have a leg to stand on if we do end up in court, I think is always a good idea as well. So for me, I support changing mixed-use development and hotels to special permits. Thank you.
Any other comments? No? Councilor Austin, you had to switch them back, but...
I'm smart enough to read the tea leaves, Madam Chair.
All right, I'm going to leave it there.
Madam Chair? Just to get a vote in, I would say I propose a vote for changing hotels to no for the Marlborough Village District.
So you're moving that?
Yes, I'm moving that, just to see what the voice of the committee says.
Is anybody willing to second that motion?
I'd call it comment. I'm not going to second it. Comment?
Comment.
Wait.
I pull my proposal.
So it wouldn't be a vote, it would be maybe a proposed amendment, but I think hotels, we're thinking big hotels, that there's always the potential, a cute little boutique hotel with a special theme could go in or something, so it's not necessarily a 100-room Hilton that we're talking about. It could be something really cute, so why limit ourselves and just leave it special permit so we can deal with it when it comes up?
Okay, fine.
Okay. All right, so we move on to number 3, and I guess this is where I really didn't want to delete the lines that are deleted, and where I was getting into everywhere I saw Marlborough Village, I just wanted to get rid of it. So I think this should stay like it is in the 650-18 conditions for uses, and I think everybody got a printout of all of those table of uses. I think what I might have been confusing, nope, that's not it. So if that's okay with everybody, just ignore that strikeout. Because actually do I, multifamily dwelling, a structure.
So Madam Chair,
Yes.
I couldn't even find it, so where is it? I'm trying to find it now.
So if you have the printout of 65018, conditions for uses, I didn't print it out, but if you,
Well, I'm gonna go right online.
I don't get a printout, but you all do.
650-18.
It's,
41.
yeah, I know it is, but I don't have that attachment. So it's on page, no, I can look at the attachment on my, if you look and scroll down to, I think it's number 4 on page 1 of the information in your packet, there's the definition, multifamily dwelling. So it's a very specific what a multifamily dwelling definition is. It's one structure or multiple structures. And I think the sentence that says it doesn't apply to mixed use or multifamily within Marlborough Village District was we wanted to allow exceptions to that. Mr. Solicitor, can you help me
Chair,
with
so
this one?
on another note, and I was looking through the other referenced sort of footnote for these uses. So hotels, number 41, if we change that to a special permit, we will need to update 41 because it's pretty much saying hotels in the village district are by right. That's the same section, but down on,
Yes, and that's, I know that there would be additional going in, and I figured you and I could go through this and fine tune it and make sure I'm not missing other stuff. But if you're on page 8 of that, you see definition 42, which is the definition of mixed use. Which includes multifamily residential uses. So it's like,
So, Madam Chair, so where I'm confused is you have the whole thing underlined in red, and underlined means it's new text, and that's where I got confused. It's not new, it's already in there, correct? Again, it's all underlined, so I'm looking for something,
oh, and I guess that was it was supposed to be stricken. That's why the lines are through it, and the underline shouldn't be there, if that's it. But now I'm saying I think we want to keep that to apply to. Although I question why the mixed-use piece is there, because this is talking multifamily dwelling. Maybe this is something the solicitor and I can look at more carefully and bring back tomorrow, so we don't get stuck on this one.
and I'm gonna, just that 650-18A9E reference, I don't know how we'd ever make anything downtown satisfy that requirement. I mean, I'm just being candid, that for open space and all the stuff that's required there, you're basically saying you're not gonna build anything downtown, if I'm reading that correctly. And so that's what I would challenge, you and the solicitor, just look to make sure I'm not reading it incorrectly, but.
No, I think you are, and that's why I said if we keep the strikeout, then that would make it hard for them to do it. If we keep the language I've got stricken, then none of that applies to Marlborough Village.
That's correct.
So we want to keep that language so that they don't have to meet all of the requirements of 650-18A9E.
That is correct, Madam Chair. Yes.
Okay?
So it's going to stay as is for now.
All right, so we're not striking that, but we can look more clearly at the definition of multifamily and the definition of mixed-use development and how they work together in Marlborough Village, I guess. And move on to 650-26, the affordable housing piece. So as I had said the last time, it was my mistake, it should remain as the title, Affordable Housing. I think Councilor Ossing had comments on the purpose of this, and I tend to agree that simplifying it, I took this language from someone else's language. I sort of threw that out at the last meeting in June. If it doesn't work for us, I'm fine with finding something that does work, but I think we need a purpose. So I believe Councilor Ossing's purpose was to ensure future housing projects have an affordable component, to ensure the city stays above the 10% inventory of affordable units.
And Madam Chair, the basis for that is, your intent is good with the purpose, but all the items that are listed there, income, ages, sizes, and all that, that has nothing to do with an affordable unit. I mean, we have, it's either affordable or it isn't. It has nothing to do with age and, it does income, but none of that stuff applies. So, again, I look at what the affordable, guidelines were when we put them back in, was to make sure that we stayed above the Chapter 40B limit. So we always had at least 10% of our inventory in the city as affordable. And I thought that makes it real simple. It doesn't tie it to, age or anything else. It's just, as a city, we want to make sure 10% of our inventory is affordable. That was my thought.
And I agree with you, but I guess I would argue that age can make a difference in how much someone's making. And so the income is related to the age. But I am okay with removing all of that, removing some of it, and putting in what was suggested. So comments from anybody? Councilor Doucette.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're talking about the purpose under 650-26, right?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I was. I understand what Councilor Ossing is saying as far as putting in the 10%. I think I'd rather see a term than a number in case someone decides that 10% isn't enough or it needs to be adjusted. I don't want to see us having to go back here and change that. But also, if we do any type of wording, I think a purpose is important to do, and I think also the goal of preserving diversity and maintaining the impacts of misuse in residential housing availability for employees working in the city, because I think that's an important part of this.
And the 10% is the key. Any community that goes below 10%, you are liable, or your chances of somebody coming in with a 40B project are right there. They're going to jump at the opportunity. So everybody wants to stay above 10%. That you can stay right at 10 and keep moving along, or you can go higher if
above 10%. But yes, yeah. But I think an important part of it is for the employees of the city.
And 10% is the inventory of the housing, so that housing changes every census report, and you kind of got to stay ahead of the game. Councilor Wagner?
I agree, again, keeping it simple, the 10%, which is determined by the state. If the state changed it, we would have to go back and look at it again anyway, but right now, that's the magic number. But I'd be nervous about how would we, in all due respect to Councilor Doucette's comment, putting in things that, who's going to monitor it? So if we say, oh, to make these units affordable to workers in Marlborough, that's the goal by having a variety of, a spectrum of housing options, but would we have to make a department then that people who, how is that going to be enforced? So adding language that is not going to be easily tracked or enforced doesn't make any sense. So the goal, again, it's all about affordability, keeping it simple with that 10% or more, and then having these mechanisms that we have in here about what affordable means, that we can legally, so those we can legally do. Anything beyond that starts to get complicated. Who's going to actually do that?
All right, I'm going to see if anybody else has comments on this, because it seems like, since you've already spoken, Councilor Doucette, I'm going to see if anybody else, and Councilor Oram.
Thank you. I was impressed with the statement. It's almost like a vision statement for affordable housing. But I understand we're trying to keep things simple, but what I would suggest, President Ossing noted a number above the 10% inventory. I would just suggest that we stay within the state requirements for affordable housing if that's going to be the statement. So if the 10% changes, we go with what the state says, you know. So that's my only comment. But I actually liked the full statement, maybe as a vision statement, and then add the part Councilor Ossing was talking about. That's my opinion.
All right, so I'm Councilor Doucette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify the point I was talking about before, is that, you know, basically, we are the supervising authority for projects that come in. So this is providing guidelines for us as special projects come to the city for apartments and stuff like that. This isn't a retroactive act. You know, when they come up, we look at the project and we say, okay, how many affordable units are you going to have and how that's going to impact the number? We've been doing those calculations for years now as these projects are coming in, and we're looking at the results. So I think we are the supervising authority. So, and I think that's implied throughout the structure.
I think we are too. And I'm going to get just a consensus. Who is okay with keeping what's there and adding in, or who's okay with striking and changing it to a modified version of Councilor Ossing's, modified so that I can work with the solicitor to figure out how to have it be not 10%, but the state's minimum. Councilor Ossing?
So again, I would keep it simple, because all this, the words in there with diversity, we don't have any choice of who they rent to. The only thing we have is that it's affordable. So all those words, I'll acknowledge, sound nice, but it's not helping. This is an ordinance, folks. Remember, this is what we're gonna live to. So you want to keep it simple, as Councilor Wagner will mention. Those are flowery words that you walk out of, you think you feel good, okay, but it's not helping us do what we want, which is to get affordable units into the city.
Right.
That's my comment.
And I'm perfectly happy with deleting it. It was just something I found and also liked. I certainly agree with Councilor Ossing. Are you okay with not having 10%, but having it be just whatever the state's
Whatever the state guidelines are, that works, that's fine.
Okay, so we can work through that minimum. Okay, so we're gonna strike that. All right, A of that, I have in black and underlined, adding in the language for all site plan approval granted for multifamily dwellings as part of a mixed-use development and all special permits. So what wasn't part of the affordable were those site plan approvals. If we actually do the
Change.
mixed use and make them by special permit, we don't really need that part of it, and it could just read all special permits approved for multifamily dwellings as part of a mixed-use development. So are we okay with no site plan for Marlborough Village?
You changed it back in the tables, the table, 65017, so by definition, you've sort of done that already.
Right, and I just want to confirm that everybody's on board with that. All right, so we will go with...
Madam Chair?
Council.
Sorry to interrupt. One suggestion I was going to make here was there was a paragraph in the last edition that the council had approved, I think was mentioned at the last meeting, that is not in here at this point, but it was sort of a catch-all. It's going to link up with the next paragraph, which had said something like, this section is going to apply to all developments that create 8 or more units in all the zoning districts, multifamily dwelling or mixed use with multifamily dwelling. So it's sort of setting what I think the committee is trying to do right now. So that may be language that could come back and be put here.
Okay, I guess I thought I had all the language except for the one that was in green from all the prior stuff, but if I missed it, we can take a look at it and see. So we're all in agreement from the veto of the mayor's order. We're going with developments of 8 or more units. Okay. So then we get to 1A, the number of on-site affordable units. A development subject to this section shall provide at least 12% of the dwelling units. Actually, I'm not going to read that because I'm going to read what I sent on my supplemental, which I'm not sure people will like anyway. But it would read, for the dwelling units constructed for home ownership, 12% shall be sold to households at 80% area medium income. If authorized as a condition in the special permit, a developer may be allowed to make a payment of not less than $75,000, which was just a number I threw out, per affordable unit that would have been required under this section. The fund shall be deposited as directed in the special permit into a fund designated by the City Council. The funds shall be used to offer a subsidy to developers planning both home ownership and rental properties with a large affordable, or it shouldn't say rental, it should only say home ownership, with a large affordable housing funding gap, the gap between the funding needed to develop and operate a property and the revenue available. And number 2, for dwelling units constructed for rental, 12% shall be sold to households at 60% or below area median income. The specific AMI will be specified in the special permit. Now, I've already heard from Mr. Montelli. Did that go to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
I put this new language in after I had talked to the people at the Housing Institute, the Housing Partnership, and her suggestion specifically to home ownership was nobody's ever going to get a mortgage below 80%. So don't even bother to dream that you can request that they go lower than 80. And that for rental, she didn't seem uncomfortable going at 60% or below. I'm willing to, I know we've had lots of conversations about this. Mr. Montelli said he couldn't build his project. He was required to put 60. I don't know that I don't want to sound nasty. It's like the developer has to come up with that issue, and that's why the language in number 1, if we've got money where we can help a developer get what they need to make the funding, there's tons of loans out there. The governor's putting in new language to increase the money that's available for builders to build housing that's affordable. But again, I'm open to what is going to pass the council. Councilor Ossing.
Yeah, shocking, right? So, again, so a couple things. So item 1 deals with building houses, right?
Condos, really.
Of which neither are happening on this larger scale. All right. Again, look at the tracts of land that are available. Do you think this is ever going to happen? So that's 1. 2, I heard what you said, Madam Chair, on where that money would be used. But we've been collecting money for affordable units now and have done a very bad job of doing anything with that money because we don't know what to do with that money. You can't build a house. Can you subsidize something? I don't know, but it's clear from what the developer said, I don't think it's going to make a difference. Item 2, setting it at 60%, that means we discriminate for people that make 80% AMI. Again, keep it simple. They can always go lower, whether they will or not. I mean, when you apply, it doesn't mean you're at 80%. You can apply, you can be at 60%, 40%. I don't know what you can apply. I mean, assume anything. This should just be 12% are going to be affordable, and the affordable limit is what's generally recognized as 80% AMI or below. I mean, it can be below. Saying you have to have X at this amount and X at this amount, who's going to track that, all right? No one is.
No, actually, the state requires the city to track it.
Oh, yeah, and we do a real good job at that, too. So I will not be supporting any of this if that goes in. I'm just making my case clear so that no one's surprised by my vote. Thank you.
Okay, and I hear you on the condos, but that doesn't mean that a future builder would not want to build condos. So that's why I want the difference between, but again, if we have it home ownership or rental and it's 80%, and that's what's agreeable, I guess my question with the 80% or below, who decides how much more below it's going? Do we have that, the amount would be specified in the special permit, so we could tell builder X they've got to go 60, we could tell builder Y they can do 80?
I mean, Council Wagner may know more, but right now, under affordable, 80% is a limit. It doesn't say you have to be at 80%. I assume it's anything under 80%, but I'll yield to Council Wagner.
We could, I mean, that could be a negotiation point depending on the size of the project and where we sometimes ask for mitigation money or something. This could be something that we decide we want to have some more units to have that flexibility, 80% or less. I was initially supportive of, because I know housing is such an issue and we need to have more affordable units, but I am now, again, the complication of who's actually going to, the integrity of who's actually going to follow through with this, and I know that we're supposed to, we do have to track how many affordable units and the, what I worry about is they're not going to say, oh, well, I guess I'll make less money. What's going to happen is the rents, or the majority of the units are going to jack up even more, which is going to make it even more, so it's not going to magically somehow, great, we got all this affordable housing, it's just going to tip the scales more, so we'll have a little more on this end, but this end now is completely out of reach for a whole new crop of people who aren't going to qualify for any of the AMI standards. So I'm nervous about if we get too aggressive on this, that we're actually going to be working against what we're trying to achieve. So I would go back to keeping it simple, the 12%, 80% AMI, and leave it at that.
But leave it at 80% or below, and then specifying in the special permit?
Yeah, and then that could be a negotiation point if we decided for some particular one, we'd really like to see, 5% come in at this number, so we'd be able to negotiate that if it was appropriate.
Okay, because I know the one that we have an example for is the boroughs. They had a lottery. They had very few people actually request to go in the lottery, but the numbers were at 80%. They weren't below 80, they were 80. So, and maybe that's the language that was in the document we approved, I don't know.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Doucette.
Yes. I actually know someone who applied for a place in the boroughs using affordable income, so I was talking about it. And it seems to be up to 80%. It's not necessarily only 80%, because, you can have up to that point, up to that limit. If you're above 80%, forget it. You lose it. The other stipulation is every year they monitor your, you as the tenant has to file a report to the landlord to say, this is what I'm making this year, and it's still within that 80%. And then if you don't, then you get into a different conversation with the landlord. Either your, rental rates go up because now you're no longer considered, you may have to move to a different unit, or however that goes, it goes. But I think that keeping it simple and straightforward is fine. The numbers isn't up to, it's not an exact 80% because no one gets to be 80% of AMI. That's a,
All right, so Councilor Nabin?
Yeah, just real quick, I think Councilor Wagner makes a really good point about what the impacts will be after these projects could be built for the entire pool of renters. I also think, we hear a lot from developers in this committee about what is going to make a project and what is going to break a project, and we very rarely hear it from folks at the borough. They've kind of come through every time, and if it's been more money to build a better project or do something else, they've been really good partners. So I think when they say we're going to have a hard time building these things, I think that's something that we should, kind of take seriously. And by keeping it simple, at the rate that they're already doing it, I think may make some sense, even though it doesn't feel good to say that, because the language that you proposed certainly does make us feel better, and it's something that we would like to see. But at what cost, both to other renters, you know, and the economic viability of future developments that could help, I think, is perhaps something we should really take a look at. So I would support keeping it simple as well and keeping it at 80% and the 12% both across condos as well as rentals.
So everybody would be okay with using number 2, but for the dwelling units constructed for home ownership and rental, the 12%, and then change 60 to 80. That seemed to be working. On the buyout, are we all agreeing we don't want a buyout, or do we want to keep a buyout so that we could potentially help a builder? And do we want the buyout to be high enough that they wouldn't buy out, but they would actually build? That's a whole nother.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Doucette.
Thank you. I don't think the buyout gets us anything, you know. I would rather just eliminate that as an option. You know, it seems to be a loose end at this point. You know, inflation can change the value of a number over time, so I don't want to put any type of number out there at all.
All right, so if we go to page 3, oh no, I guess it's on the bottom of page 2, where if authorized by the majority of the city council, provide a sum not less than $50,000, all of that language I've got stricken, everybody's okay with leaving it gone.
Yep.
But we would change that language to what I had read from my addition. So 1A would become for the dwelling units, and we wouldn't have any buyout.
Madam Chair, can I offer one comment on the specific AMI being specified in the special permit? I don't know if that, I think, can be problematic if that sentence stays in without some criteria of what exactly that would mean. So for example, in some communities, they will establish criteria to have, if you build at lower AMI amounts, you can have less parking, build more units, but those criteria need to all be set out in the ordinance to have something like that. It can't, I would advise against having something that leaves it for a special permit without any criteria put in here about what that might mean. But if it's just a straight 80% or less, 12% of the units, and that's not going to be changed in a special permit, that's pretty straightforward. But if it's going to be something that's left to get conditioned later on at the special permit phase, I think that does need criteria here to establish what would that mean on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and that I think what you're referring to, I've read, is called a comprehensive permit, where you're doing, we'll give you this, but you got to give us that. And I don't know that if we want to go down that route, that's a whole nother look at the code. So maybe keeping it clean for now and just do 80. I mean, to me, that changes our whole process of trying to get to the lower AMI for people who need it. But I guess if Councilor Doucette's comment that it says 80 or below, then somebody who doesn't make 80 could still apply.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Doucette.
Thank you. We're still doing the 2-stage affordability, right? There was 2.
No, we're doing 1 stage. Everybody at 12% is at 80%.
So there was,
or below.
okay, I thought there was something that we had previously where, for larger developments.
Well, there was, but I changed on that one completely.
And eliminated it.
That whole B language of the 12%, 10% would be affordable at 50%, and no more than 80, that whole B is gone. I think if we go with what I read with, it's
Right.
12% and everything rental
And
or
2%
homeownership.
sold or rented to families at least 30%. So the B is completely striked out.
Yes. I just didn't get to it yet, but B is gone. So we're okay striking the specific AMI amount specified? That's gone too?
Yep, I
Counselor?
just want to say, Madam Chair, I agree with that. I think that it's good, it'll, by not having a buyout, I think it's a good practice that this is it. We're not going to fiddle with it in special permit. It's the 80% or less, so that catches everybody up to 80% and all below, so we don't have to specify how, different points along that continuum, and 12%. And if really all the projects that go in, we have 12%, it gives us a nice, healthy stock to be pulling from. So I think it helps us achieve our goal without tilting the scales too much with getting too much on one end and then driving the rents again up on the other end. So I like this approach.
Okay. So on page 3, then B is gone. C is an addition. After initial occupancy, the gross household income of an eligible household shall be verified annually to determine continued eligibility and rent. And I think that's in there because that's my understanding that they have to do it. So, local preference. We have currently that the developer has to provide 70% of the affordable dwelling units eligible to residents of the city of Marlborough. So I did ask, the boroughs made it clear that they didn't get enough applications to give 70% to the city. The woman that I talked to at the Housing Partnership recommends not having a percentage in there for local preference or lowering it because 70 is the max. If we have somebody come in with another lip like we did with the boroughs, that's the max the state will ever approve. But the city's supposed to prove that that number is a legitimate number and you can actually get people to apply, which it seems like, at least for the boroughs, didn't happen. So I'm throwing it out there. Are we game for getting rid of it, keeping it, reducing it? I see a new face, Councilor
No,
Goodman.
I don't understand, like, what are the consequences if they don't? Like, again, back to the regulation, like, if they don't do the 70%, then what?
If nobody's applying, then they have to give it, I think they have to give it to the people that have applied. Now, I believe that's why we as city employees all got an email from the mayor's office letting us know, so there could be another round of applications. If nobody applies, and
Yeah, Madam Chair, they're not going to stay, the developer goes a good faith effort to say, okay, show me if, who's interested, and if they don't get it, they will rent them out. They're not going to sit there and wait to fill 70% of the affordable units in
That's
Marlborough.
the assumption,
Right.
right? But I mean, by here, it's just like, okay, like,
It's really, we want a preference to Marlborough, but you can't,
Sure.
there is no guarantee, right? I mean, that's,
Right.
it's kind of nice language that we would probably put in a special permit, right? We'd probably, and say, hey, prefer, give some preferential treatment to Marlborough like we do for
Right.
vendors and other things, and if it works, it works, if it
Right.
doesn't.
I just don't understand the percentage. I guess that's the question, like.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Doucette.
I wanted him to go first because he had to say something here.
I had to, yeah, right.
The one other wording change I'd like to see is eligible residents or employees within the city of Marlborough. So it's not just the people who work here, but not just the people who live here, but also the people who work here. Those are the ones that actually need the help with affordable housing. I hear that constantly.
True.
Councilor Nabin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, I think, whether or not it's successful that they reach that, I think the point is valid, is that we want to be at least requiring good faith effort, so I think leaving it is helpful. And I agree with Councilor Doucette, if, we can help our employees that, that is only targeting, if we add that language, it's only targeting employees that don't live within the city, and wouldn't it be great if more of our employees lived in the city? I do wonder if the 70% is set in statute, is there other statutory requirements or language would we be allowed to do that, or is that only for local preference that we can add that?
So that's something I'd have to look at, whether we could add, the 70% is coming from a state regulation, so I'd have to look at if the committee wanted to add in eligible residents and employees who work in the city, we could take a look at that.
Okay, and everybody's okay keeping it at 70?
Just for clarification, who work for the city or in the city? That's two very different.
In the city.
In the city.
Just wanna make sure.
Employed in-
Absolutely excellent clarification, which would cover both cases.
Which that, I mean, somebody who lives here can show that they live here. We'll find out if we can legally do it. Counselor Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. If we opened it up to residents and employees, would we also need to have some sort of definition of, I guess, amount of hours that they work? Like, would it be 20-plus hours, 30-plus hours? Like a definition of, are they a part-time employee in Marlborough?
That's a good question. I don't know.
if
We're
I could
going
ha-
down that,
Yeah, if I could, that'll get way too, because I can quit my job tomorrow and then it doesn't matter anymore, right? I'm still there. So it's really, are you working in Marlborough? Yeah, I mean, I think your point's correct. You're working in Marlborough. Doesn't mean I'm working in Marlborough 6 months from now, but at the time, I satisfied the criteria.
I'm sorry, for me, I just asked the question just for more preventing the program to be being taken advantage of. I feel like there could be loopholes presented if it's just open like that.
anybody else? Counselor Orem, sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's like, those people over there.
We've been a busy night already. Under that section, there is a note that says that all legally permissible efforts. What is a legally permissible effort?
So this is an example of one where what happens here is the city makes its case to DHCD that there is essentially a backlog of people looking for affordable units in Marlborough. And this is what happened in the case of the borough, as we've been talking about. So the city made the request, and it was backed up with some statistical data about the demand. The CDA provided information on their waiting list for units. That's an example of where state regulation is authorizing this local preference. It's just a preference. It's just a one weight in the lottery system. That's an example of essentially the legally permissible effort that we're talking about.
Okay, so what brings to mind is this email from the boroughs or this information. Seemed like they tried, but are there other avenues that we didn't offer to them to reach out to the Marlborough workers, to all the people that work in Marlborough, to the residents, to the elderly? Is there a mechanism? I mean, I didn't know about this till I saw it from the mayor's office, that, they're looking for people for affordable housing. How do the elderly find out? Maybe they want to sell their house and they didn't know they could get into this. I'm very curious because we're going to promote it. How are we promoting it is my question.
So it's a good question. So essentially, anyone who's building on an ordinance like this has to come up with a detailed marketing plan, but that's really driven by the developer in terms of what marketing they're going to do. Of course, their incentive is to fill the tenancy of these units. But they have a marketing plan, which again is reviewed at the state level, and the CDA may also provide feedback on that.
And there is a website that people can go to in the state of Massachusetts to look for affordable housing. The boroughs is on that list. It was interesting what was and what wasn't, but.
And Madam Chair, if I can on that note, you had mentioned earlier that some cities and towns have affordable community affordable managers or whatever, and we don't. Is that something that, since we don't have a coordinator for affordable housing, that you reach out to another department? I don't know the answer to that. Who do we reach out to in Marlborough?
I think it's all done through the mayor's office.
So the mayor's office.
I'm looking at the LIP agreement that we signed.
Yeah, no, that's
They
fine.
have to get a marketing plan, which is what the boroughs did. They got a marketing plan. They hired a marketing firm. They didn't like their marketing plan, and they found another firm who went out and did other things. So I think those are all sorts of things that developers know they have to do. The specific language in the boroughs is, and I don't know if it's because that's the law, proposed local preference will, the marketing plan shall include a preference for local residents for up to 70%. It doesn't say anything about employees.
Well, thank you for your answers. It just brought to mind that maybe another matter that needs to be, outside of these, or this ordinance, but something that might need to be resolved down the road. Thank you, and thank you for the communication from the boroughs.
Yeah, it was very helpful to kind of answer all those questions. All right, so we are okay leaving the local preference. We're going to find out if we can add in employees. Is that kind of the consensus where we are? All right, the only other change in here was in the period affordability, getting rid of the minimum and making it in perpetuity, and striking the alternate site. Then in the new K, guarantee of performance, this was new language, I think, that was added in. No certificate of occupancy, and I think Councilor Ossing had suggested final certificate.
Well, actually, we discussed it at the last meeting and said we were going to put that in there. I'm just highlighting that.
I missed it, I guess,
No,
sorry.
that's okay. No, you had a lot going on, so.
No final certificate of occupancy shall be issued for any unit within a development, and I think,
It basically makes sure we're in compliance. When the final occupancy permit is issued, that we're in compliance with the affordability guidelines.
right, and so this was something we discussed without the solicitor. My question was, is this sufficient language? So,
Yes,
do you have any comments, suggestions?
I think that works. I think that's the way, excuse me, it's been interpreted to date. I think that's the way it's played out with the borough project.
Okay. We are deleting developments of 19 or fewer, so it is, everything is 8 or more. And then the provisions, number 2, provisions of this section shall not apply to a special permit for an existing retirement community. And I had put in my notes that, I think what I found out was that you can't get a loan to build retirement communities that exclude anybody under 18. So if we want affordable to count, we'd have to change our over 55 to allow people under 18 to live there. So if we don't want to go down that path, then we just keep that in there. Councilor Doucette.
Thank you. So elderly housing is not considered affordable housing?
Elderly housing is
55,
in,
A different category from,
I think it's a different category. I mean, we call it over 55,
right.
but there's elderly housing that the state builds, which is probably different
That's a completely
rules.
different piece, right. Yeah, okay.
So just leave that one there, so it doesn't apply to, the affordable won't apply to existing retirement community. And number 4, we're striking the provisions of this section shall not apply to projects granted special permits within the Marlborough Village District. So they will have to do affordables in the Marlborough Village District for future. So my proviso, I believe Councilor Ossing preferred having a list.
Well, actually, Madam Chair, if I could, so not necessarily the list, I just wanted to illustrate, and whatever the wording that the solicitor, we burden the poor solicitor with this, I just want to make sure that the councils recognize items that any of these changes will not apply to, so Green District Phase 1 and 2, E on Main, 28 South Bolton, 57 Main Street, Lincoln and Mechanic Street, 272 Lincoln and Cashman, Trailside Terrace, 96 Crowley Drive, McGee Farm. Again, these are my notes of what I call permits we've already done, we've already said go, so we can't really change the rules on them. Now, just, again, for the council's awareness, things that potentially would be impacted would be Green District 3 and 4, right? Assuming if they want to come back for a permit, they would then fall into the new, phases 3 and 4 would.
Unless they get it in before this is actually on an agenda.
That is correct, yep.
That's,
The Armory project, it's 17 units, so that it would apply. Boston Scientific. The campus is still kind of hanging out there. We haven't done anything with it, but there's still a 100-unit that's still kind of hanging in committee that, you know, that they haven't moved forward on it, but that's out there. Just so that, as a council, we're aware, you know, what projects would not be applying to these new changes and what potentially would be applying to the new change. And Councilor Roby is exactly correct. If the, you know, we have a run-on permits at the next meeting, that could be a challenge.
And I may be wrong, but I would argue Eon Main's special site plan, no, it was a special permit because they added, is gone because they're over the time limit.
Did the time limit expire?
So
Expired?
I didn't know if you added the COVID in.
I think we did add COVID in, and I think it's still expired, but again, it's one of those, we can double check, but I don't think it's not coming, even if it was. So it is,
Not there.
is the proviso sufficient for what we need, in your opinion, Mr. Solicitor?
I think we can flesh that out. I think you know, it's correct to be concerned. You could have projects that have already gotten approvals that don't build fast enough, that lose freezes. You could have projects that are getting planned that could file in the next, you know, you pick it, 6 months, something like that. So the question is which projects to not have affordable housing provisions apply to among some, you know, the other, you know, changes to the mixed-use definition may be another one that could impact projects, so.
I think I added one at the very end.
bottom,
But we
okay.
can get to that one. So,
So we could flesh out language that's along the lines of what
But
the intent is.
if I may, Madam Chair, again, legally, if the permit expired, ownership changed, they can't sell a special permit to a new owner, can they?
Special permits will run with the land, so they could go.
Oh, so
they'll
it could
continue.
be sold to a new owner,
Yep,
and the special permit goes with it.
yep, and,
So, okay.
Didn't expire.
you know, even someone who gets like, so a special permit has to be used within a certain amount of time.
Sure.
Even though, even sooner than when it might expire to keep a zoning freeze in place.
Does
Site
that-
plan, yeah.
If
go
I
ahead.
can, just a quick question in that, does that mean if they excavated the area out, put up a fence, is that still an active special permit?
Possibly. They may need to
Legal
do
matter.
more than that. It's a legal issue that there's a lot of fights about, so I think,
Okay,
all that's to say, I think we can be very clear here about projects that have gotten a special permit or site plan by, we'll pick, you know, the date, they will not be subject to this, and then you don't get into any conflicts there with that, you know.
okay. Counselor Ossing, I see your hand.
So the building commissioner, because I remember having this discussion with him at the end of last year, on December 8th of last year, he issued a letter to Eon Maine. The special permit issued on October 7th, 2019 has not lapsed as a portion of the lapse period was tolled, T-O-L-L-E-D, not T-O-L-D, during COVID state of emergency per the state law. This permit would not lapse until January 12th, 2024.
Okay. So-
Plan shows 67 residential units, 2 retail units, 43 garage parking spaces. And any deviation from the approved special permit set may require review from the site plan committee and special permit granting authority. So, Council Oram, or whoever asked the question, January 12th, 2024 is when Eon Maine lapses, unless they come in before us and ask for an extension.
Okay, so the solicitor can clarify that language. All right, I've got the new amendment to 650-34, and I know it's talking about site plan. Councilor Ossing had some comments that he had made. I really put this in there because I think when we were working with, I think it was the Lincoln Mechanic Street project, it went to site plan. Marlborough, or the city council is actually the site plan authority and the special permit authority, but it went to site plan review and it extended they have 90 days that they're supposed to finish their site plan review, and they didn't. So because we were the site plan review, we sort of got to just let it go forever. It didn't go forever. So I was trying to figure out how to put language in so that we don't get in trouble. But if we're if the sense is that it's not an issue, then I'm happy removing it. But that was really my thinking, that site plan review, and I hear they should go for
Informal.
an informal site plan review, work out all the issues, then come to us for the formal site plan review, and we would then, we would have, see, there's nothing in our language that talks about a deadline. We don't have you have to have the site plan review done by a certain time, where the site plan review committee does, in language on 270.
Madam Chair, and the solicitor can correct me, I thought if we then take on that role of site plan, that time period would then apply to us, but, I mean, we can look at it, but, again, I would say we don't accept any site plan for approval until the applicant has gone before the real site plan to get the informal piece done, so we have kind of all that stuff washed out, so that when we start our review, the council has the 90 days to go.
And if I may, Madam Chair.
Councilor Oren.
I agree and concur with President Ossing. Clock starts when it starts with the city council site plan review, period. We answer to the residents. Site plan review committee are employees who answer to us. So I think it's very important that we specify that site plan occurs with the city council, period. And if afterwards the site plan review committee, the employees can do their part as well. We rely on them, they're experts. But we are answering to our constituents, and if they're doing it before us and our constituents call, makes it very complicated. It would make it complicated for me. So I agree, we should be the site plan review, period.
Councilor Doucette?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we are doing the site plan review, I think it's in our best interest to have the professionals review it, whether or not it's done in parallel to us or coordinate, one being done before the other. If they go to the typical site plan review committee and they have a certain amount of time to go through that and the clock hasn't started yet, you could still have them running around ragged for, why? Because it's not a real site plan review, because they won't take it as important, because they're not under a time crunch either. So both of these, I think, are important organizations to review what's going on. And I would, in the cases that we've had so far, where we've been doing site plan review, I would prefer the advice and the review of the professionals to make the final decisions. But there is a timing involved, and I think we have to respect that and do a better job coordinated with site plan review, if that's the case.
And I believe there is language in site plan review that their job is to send a report to the council. I know we have Ms. Bully pressuring the managers to send their comments so that when Urban Affairs meets, we have those when we then do the site plan. But if our code says that the city council is the site plan review body, then we take input from site plan, but we're the ones creating the actual language. We trust them to deal with all of the heavy lifting. And I know they've commented that their purview is not the design of the building, it's the structure of the building. It bothered me that we don't have a time frame, and if we're okay with the fact that we don't have one, then we don't need to add this in.
I think the only thing I'll add on the time frame is I think the question becomes, what's the consequence if the council doesn't meet the time frame? And so currently, where there's no explicit, clause addressing that, there's also no appellate court cases saying that you get a constructive approval if you do not do site plan review on time. So I think that, if we go ahead and try to put in a specific time frame for the council, I think we have to be prepared for the potential consequence that if we don't meet that time frame without an agreed to extension with the applicant, that they're going to be arguing there's a constructive approval, which is okay, and some communities do build that right into their ordinance because they're signaling to the applicant that there will be a certain time frame that they're going to live with. But that's not necessarily a requirement. That's really a local choice at this point.
Okay, so, but if we're this official site plan review, then our site plan review committee's timeframe doesn't really go into effect. Is that correct?
I think there's ambiguity in the ordinance about, particularly in 270, about, there's certainly timeframes in there for what the administrative site plan process is supposed to be. And then in that parts of our zoning, there are provisions that say the city council will be the site plan authority for certain things, and they can delegate certain aspects or all of it to the site plan review committee. But there's nothing that exactly says, and the clock will start when the city council gets, the package from the review committee. So that doesn't exist here. So one can argue about what that would mean in terms of whether the clock ever starts.
Okay, so strike the green. We're just not going to go down that path.
That's fine.
D is design standards, and this is where I guess I'm just going to throw it out there. I think we went over this the last time. The comment from Councilor Ossing was in DA to change shall back to will. I changed it because I didn't get anybody saying that it shouldn't be shall. If we want to go back to will.
Madam Chair, the basis is for the shall complement. Again, we'll never all agree on what that complement looks like. So will gives us all an opportunity, but shall, I wrestle with my version of what it's going to look like. Is good is different than someone else's vision of what good looks like. And not necessarily you want my vision of what good looks like, but it's a tough one to say. So that's why I would just say leave it at will, and we'll work on it.
Everybody okay with going back to will?
I'm not. This is an ordinance. It's legal. The word shall is so important in any type of ordinance or regulation. And I think it can vary too much if you use any other word like may or will. In my view, it should state shall. And I would ask our legal counsel of his opinion.
My bigger picture question is what's the intent of all of the changes in this paragraph overall? Because then that will inform what the wording will be. I know the word non-mandatory is struck, but I think I mentioned maybe an earlier draft, I think the guidelines themselves probably need to be reviewed to see how they read. So the design guidelines need to match up with these changes, because my understanding of the guidelines is they were written to complement the design requirements that are in the ordinance, but they're not requirements. So that may need to make a change like this may require actually looking more into the guidelines also to make sure, because the next question will be if the guidelines are mandatory and we were to apply them to a project, what does that look like exactly? And are the guidelines written in a way that it is very clear if it's not A, B, or C, you pick the subject, the way the landscaping is, the way the exterior is, the roof angles. Is it clear enough that we're going to all know what's mandatory, or is it really, are the guidelines all written to be optional or aspirational? And then I'd hate to see the council sort of having to review guidelines that really aren't set up for being mandatory. So that's one general comment to that.
So if currently there's just this list, and to me I think it's a pretty extensive list. I went back and looked at it again. It's never really, the idea is the developer does a checklist, the council does a checklist, we compare. We've never done a checklist. So I want to have a sit down. They will review the design standards before we get into the seriousness. If we don't like the design, I think they need to know up front. Go back to the drawing board and bring us something else. So that conversation's going to be something that happens at site plan. personally. Counselor Ossing?
Yeah, so again, go back to the design guidelines. We spent a lot of money, we got them done, we went through the checklist on a couple of test cases, and then like everything else, it goes and disappears under someone's desk, and we never see it again, right? Council Roby's correct in that if we wanted to, if we're following these correctly, the developer does their thing, which Attorney Falk does do. He submits the guidelines. They're there. They're always scored 100 and something. I mean, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I mean, otherwise, why would you submit the thing? But we never, as a council, go back and say, well, how would we score it, and do we agree with the ratings? And I think that's what you're really looking at, Madam Chair, is to say, okay, you know, we want the developer to fill out the guideline, and then we want us, the council, to do the same and sit down and compare notes before you get too far into the project development, I guess, right?
And I think going back to the will, because it says it will provide a guide so that we can be honest with the developer and say, we're never going to approve this special permit with what you've submitted. And I believe that the guidelines have enough specificity in them, along with the design standards that are there, that we can make it work.
And the only other thing I was going to offer is if there are things in the guidelines that the committee either absolutely does want to see in design or doesn't, my suggestion would be to pull those out and put those into the ordinance, because I think it gets a little squishy when the applicant is checking the boxes on the ordinance, and then if they have a few options to pick from in the guidelines, that's where they're going to say, I'm using, you know, J instead of A through, you know, I. And so those are just things that certainly the ordinance has design standards already. It doesn't cover every possibility, but that is just an opportunity to tighten up any design requirements that the committee really, you know, would want to see. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So did anybody look at the guidelines to see if there were anything that we would recommend changing? Maybe that can be homework. It sounds like this is still got some work. If there's not really anything, then we can just leave it as it is. If there are pieces we'd like, we can bring it back. But for now, I'm going to switch the shall back to will. And then there's the new addition of 2, all site plan review and special permit applications in the Marlborough Village District shall be subject to the following design standards. And I didn't actually, that's just a sentence in there already, and the design standards are then listed. It's really just adding special permit.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Wagner.
I think it would be good for us as at least as a committee to all, maybe in the next meeting, to read the guidelines and actually talk about them. I will admit I hadn't looked at them. I know we talked about them at one point, but they were sent some time ago, and it really stood out to me, the email we got from Mr. Montelli, was it him? Who talked about the increase in the cost of, was it like 20 million? The cost in the construction that went up just from phase 2 to phase 1. And when we set those guidelines, the world was a very different place. And some things, like I believe, aren't those the guidelines that require things like real brick as opposed to brick face? And some of those guidelines may be setting us up for failure, and would help maybe to revisit them.
Okay, so if people have time to do that. The design standards are in the code, so they're a little bit different. They are in 650-34, building scale, roof form, entrances, external material and appearances, reflective material, transparent windows, landscaping, service areas, vehicles, parking, bicycle parking. They're all listed. I didn't list them in here. All I did was add special permit to the number 2 language, so that you can take a look at those too and see if any of that needs to be clarified, or if that is enough between the design standards and the guidelines. We can do this. All right, we're at parking on page 5, and it's 9 o'clock. Is everybody okay, keep going? Or do you, we have another meeting tomorrow. I was really hoping to get through this. Everybody's,
Just a question regarding design standards, or something to think about. I think we all just focus on the road project, which actually has some landscaping, some frontage, and some backage. My thought process or forward thinking is to start thinking of like the Golden Building or the Quarry Building or Rocks, or where these owners will probably sell within the next 5, 10, 15 years, where the design standards may not be suitable for those actual locations because they're up against the sidewalk, there's no room, or even East on Main, where you don't have the landscaping options, you don't have the parking options because it's all two-story buildings. So when you think of downtown, I think I automatically go to the road project as opposed to all of Main Street. So when we're thinking of how we want Main Street to look like, how high up can you go and how much parking can you actually facilitate to actual mixed use? And I don't think we're having that conversation on a broader scale. We're just focusing on road project because that was what came before us. So it's just something for us to think about as we move long term, because again, this is going to affect a lot of Main Street and not just one parcel of land that has been in conversation for numerous months.
and I think parking is key. Everybody tonight has brought up parking. Parking is part of this, and then height is on page 6, something that we didn't really get to, but I think we need to have that conversation. As Council Ossing said, if we only want it to be X tall, then we need to make clear that that's what we want. Council Wagner?
Can you clarify, since you asked about the time, I mean, I also want to do a really good job in this and don't want to feel like, oh, it's 9, let's just get it done, and feel like we're rushing. Are we talking about going through 6, or, I mean, how much, there isn't anything, help me understand what's exactly.
Well, I think parking's going to be a potentially lengthy discussion, so maybe we should just move it till tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
And I think then I would suggest that everybody bring their calendars so that we can set another meeting, because I don't think we're going to get done tomorrow.
No.
And we can keep going.
I think that's great, so then I would move to adjourn for this evening.
Councilor Ossing?
So, Madam Chair, just getting through 65026, the affordable was, to the committee's credit, a pretty good piece of work. I mean, that was a lot. I mean, you've got a lot in front of the committee right now, but getting the affordable piece through, get those changes incorporated, I think that's a great start. Because, and I will just, for the councilors, so downtown, again, I get back to what I said in the beginning. We spent a lot of time with public input and everything else to say, what did we want downtown to look like? So now if we're going to change where parks, who can park, how many can park, this isn't hard. We know how many parking spaces are. So if you're going to say we're going to build something and you only have 50 parking spaces that you're going to rent out or however we're going to allocate them, that kind of tells you how much building you can actually do. So look at it in that context if you want. Because you can't just build everything. We have limited parking. I agree with Council Wagner. Let's build another parking garage if that's the route. If you think that's going to solve the problem. But if you sit there and restrict every parking space and say you can only park in this one and this one, and we know that this one's got a lot of people in it most of the time, the one on Newton Street not so much, but we can count how many what I call available spaces would be for whoever to park there. Because remember, the people that are here now, they're using it right now, right? And no one's complaining, right? But if we're going to add to downtown, which seems to be, I hear that in one voice, but then I don't want to add too much to downtown, then change the ordinance to say, what size project do I want to have downtown? Which is okay, but boutique hotels, you only want to have a 30-room apartment with commercial downstairs, all good projects. Whether they're financially feasible, that I don't know, right? Because the builder's going to take whatever we set, and they're going to go to the ends of the extremes to maximize, their profits, which, you know, that's what they're gonna do. So it's incumbent upon us to set what that criteria is we want for downtown. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
That's true. All right, so if everybody really does think about that, go over section 650-34 for the design specifications, look at the other piece, and we'll start tomorrow at 7:30. We do have other items on the agenda first. Hopefully they'll go quickly, and we can get back to this. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are adjourned at 9:04. Thank you, everybody.